Don't trust your wife. Pretend to be sick. Get off this plane. Now.
The injustice didn't come with a scream or an explosion. It came as a whisper at 30,000 feet. A flight attendant stopped beside Miles' Hart's seat, her face pale, her eyes urgent, and leaned in close. "Don't trust your wife," she murmured. "Pretend to be sick. Get off this plane. Now." Across the aisle, Miles' wife smiled at her phone, calm and radiant, as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Yet, in that instant, everything was. Why would a stranger risk her job to warn him? What did she see that he hadn't after years of marriage? The cabin felt tighter, the air heavier, and Miles sensed that if he stayed seated, his life would quietly end long before the plane landed. Before we dive into this story, comment your city and local time. I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you're drawn to cinematic, emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Miles' Hart had never been afraid of flying. He had always trusted numbers, systems, routines, things that followed rules. Planes stayed in the air because physics said they would. Marriages stayed together because two people promised they would. That belief had carried him through 12 years of steady work, careful savings, and a wedding that looked perfect in photos. Now, strapped into seat 18B, that belief was cracking. His pulse thudded loud enough that he was sure the woman beside him could hear it. Serena Hart sat with one leg crossed over the other, posture flawless, chin slightly lifted. She wore a soft ivory dress that hugged her frame just enough to look effortless. Her dark hair fell in smooth waves over one shoulder, glossy and controlled, like everything else about her. The glow from her phone reflected in her eyes as she smiled at something on the screen. Miles tried to tell himself he was overreacting. The whisper replayed in his head anyway. "Don't trust your wife." He swallowed and shifted in his seat. His body felt strange, too warm, too aware of itself. The cabin hummed with quiet conversations, the rustle of magazines, the faint clink of ice in plastic cups, ordinary sounds, safe sounds, yet his chest felt tight, as if the air pressure had already changed, and he was the only one who noticed. This trip had been Serena's idea. Miami, sun, ocean, a reset. She'd said it, with that careful tone she used when something was already decided. Miles hadn't argued. He rarely did anymore. Over the past year, arguments had become exhausting puzzles where he always seemed to lose. No matter how calmly he spoke, Serena had a way of turning every concern back onto him. His stress, his imagination, his tendency to spiral. He glanced at her again. She laughed softly, thumb moving fast across the screen, then angled the phone slightly away when she sensed his gaze. A small thing, almost nothing. Miles remembered the flight attendant's eyes. Not dramatic, not hysterical, focused, afraid but not for herself. His stomach tightened. They had met 7 years earlier at a charity fundraiser his company sponsored. Serena had seemed warm then, magnetic, intensely attentive. She remembered small details, asked thoughtful questions, made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Friends had joked that he'd married out of his league. Even now, part of him believed it. But somewhere along the line, warmth had turned into control. Serena handled the finances because she was better with numbers. She encouraged him to distance himself from friends who were negative influences. She questioned his memory when he brought up things she'd said before. Slowly, quietly, his world had shrunk. The seatbelt sign chimed. Miles flinched. He thought about the second part of the warning. Pretend to be sick. It sounded ridiculous, dramatic, and yet his body reacted as if the decision had already been made for him. His mouth went dry, a wave of nausea rolled through him. Not entirely fake, Serena finally looked up. "You okay?" she asked, voice smooth, concerned enough for show. Her eyes flicked briefly to his face, then back to the phone. "Yeah," he said automatically. The word felt like a lie that didn't fit anymore. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling panels. If he stayed, what exactly was he afraid of? There was no weapon, no open threat, just a stranger's whisper, and a growing sense that something in his life was dangerously misaligned. He remembered another detail. As the flight attendant had walked away, she'd paused and let something slip into the seat pocket in front of him. He hadn't dared check it yet. Miles shifted forward and slid a finger into the pocket. His hand brushed paper. His heart kicked harder. He pulled it out slowly, keeping it low, shielded by his jacket. It was a napkin. On it, a single line, written in neat, hurried handwriting. "Don't drink anything she gives you." His breath caught. A laugh burst from Serena's lips, a little louder than before. She turned her phone toward him. "Look at this. Can you believe people actually fall for this stuff?" On the screen was an article headline about a man who'd been scammed by someone he met online. The irony hit him like a slap. "People see what they want to see," Serena added lightly. "That's how they get hurt." Miles forced a weak smile. Inside, something cold settled into place. The timing was too precise, the warning too specific. He folded the napkin and slipped it into his pocket. His thoughts raced. If he caused a scene, Serena would control the narrative. She always did. If he confronted her directly, she'd deny everything, make him doubt himself until he apologized. But pretending to be sick, that gave him leverage. An excuse that didn't accuse, a pause button. He pressed a hand to his stomach and leaned forward, elbows on knees. The nausea came back stronger, helped along by adrenaline. He let his breathing grow shallow. Serena's smile faded, replaced by something sharper. "Miles, I don't feel so good," he said. This time, it wasn't entirely an act. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction before concern rushed back in. Polished and perfect. "You were fine 5 minutes ago." "I know," he whispered. "I feel dizzy." A few heads turned. The flight attendant from earlier reappeared almost instantly, as if she'd been watching the entire time. She knelt beside him, her presence steady, grounding. "Sir, are you experiencing nausea or chest discomfort?" she asked. Loud enough for protocol, quiet enough for urgency. "Yes," Miles said, meeting her eyes. He saw relief flash there. Confirmation. Serena reached for his arm. "He's just anxious," she said quickly. "He does this sometimes when he's stressed." The injustice burned. Miles wanted to pull away, to shout that she didn't get to define him anymore. Instead, he let his shoulders slump, let himself look small. "I think I might pass out," he murmured. The flight attendant stood. "We may need to have medical staff check you before takeoff," she said. Serena's hand tightened on his arm. "That's not necessary," she said, her smile strained now. "We can't miss this flight." Miles closed his eyes. The mystery had opened its first door. Whatever waited on the other side, he knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Staying seated was no longer an option. The words, "we can't miss this flight," landed heavier than they should have. Miles felt Serena's fingers dig into his arm, nails pressing just enough to hurt. The touch wasn't comfort, it was control. He opened his eyes and met the flight attendant's gaze again. She didn't look away. "Sir," the attendant said calmly, easing Serena's hand aside with professional politeness. "Your safety comes first." Miles let his head fall back against the seat. The cabin lights blurred. He focused on his breathing, making it shallow, uneven. The nausea swelled, half imagined, half real. Around them, murmurs rose, curiosity, annoyance, and sympathy. A small spectacle was forming. And Serena hated spectacles she didn't direct. "I'm sorry," Serena said, standing now, her voice coated in concern. "My husband's been under a lot of pressure lately. Work, stress, panic attacks." She smiled apologetically at the surrounding passengers. "He's sensitive." Each word chipped away at something inside Miles. He'd heard this version of himself before. Fragile, unreliable, always the problem to be managed. He wondered how many times she'd described him this way when he wasn't around. The flight attendant straightened. "We'll need to have you checked by ground medical staff," she said. "It won't take long." Serena's jaw tightened. For a split second, the mask slipped. Fear flashed across her face. Not fear for him, but fear of delay. of interruption. No, Serena said too quickly. We've been planning this trip for months. Miles swallowed. I really don't feel okay, he murmured. He hated how small he sounded, but he pushed through it. I think I need help. Silence followed, thick and awkward. Then the attendant nodded. All right, let's step off for a moment. The decision was made. The plane hadn't moved yet, but Miles felt as if he'd already jumped. As he stood, his legs wobbled convincingly. The flight attendant took his elbow, steady and reassuring. Serena hovered, torn between staying close and calling someone, anyone who could undo this. You're overreacting, Serena whispered, leaning in as they reached the aisle. Her voice was low, urgent. You're embarrassing yourself. Miles didn't answer. He couldn't. If he did, he might say something he couldn't take back. They moved toward the front of the cabin. The hum of conversation followed them, passengers craning their necks. At the door, the attendant paused, speaking briefly to the captain. Miles caught only fragments medical concern, precautionary measure. Then, the door opened. Cool air rushed in from the jet bridge. It felt like relief. As soon as they stepped out of sight of the passengers, Serena's demeanor shifted. Her smile vanished. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Do you have any idea how much this trip cost? Miles leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to his stomach. The jet bridge felt suddenly long and exposed. The attendant raised a hand gently. Ma'am, please, let medical staff do their job. Serena turned to her, eyes sharp. I'm his wife. Yes, the attendant said evenly, and I'm responsible for his safety right now. Ground medical personnel approached with a wheelchair. Miles resisted the urge to stand straighter. He let them guide him, let the charade continue. Serena followed, phone already in her hand. While a medic checked his pulse and blood pressure, Serena stepped a few feet away, turning her back. She lowered her voice, but not enough. Miles caught the edge of it, frantic, clipped. Yes, no, not yet. Something came up. I'll fix it, the medic frowned slightly. Your vitals are elevated, could be anxiety, but we should monitor you for a bit. I told you, Serena said, spinning back around. He gets like this. The flight attendant stepped closer to Miles, her voice dropping. You did the right thing, she whispered. Stay with us. He searched her face. Why? He asked quietly. Why are you helping me? Her eyes flicked toward Serena, who was now pacing, clearly agitated. Because I've seen her before, the attendant said. And the last time, it didn't end well. Before he could ask more, Serena returned, forcing a bright smile. I'll go ahead and rebook things, she said. You rest. Something about the word rest chilled him. You're leaving, Miles asked. Just for a minute, she replied, already stepping back. We'll catch a later flight. She walked away without waiting for an answer. The medic rolled Miles toward a small medical room near the gate. The flight attendant followed until the door, then paused. I'm Elena, she said. I'll check on you soon. Inside the room, the door closed softly. Miles sat alone, heart racing. The quiet was deafening. He pulled the napkin from his pocket again, reading the words as if they might change. Minutes passed, 10, maybe 15. No Serena. He checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. When the door opened again, it wasn't Elena. It was a uniformed airport security officer, accompanied by a woman in plain clothes with sharp eyes and a notebook tucked under her arm. Mr. Hart, the woman asked. I'm Rowan Pike. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Miles nodded slowly. As Rowan spoke routine questions at first, his mind drifted back to the jet bridge, to Serena's hurried phone call, to the way she'd left without looking back. Then the door opened once more. Elena stepped inside, her expression grave. She boarded another flight, Elena said quietly. Different destination. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to follow. The room tilted. Miles stared at the floor. the truth finally landing with brutal clarity. Serena hadn't stayed. She hadn't waited. She'd chosen the plan over him. And whatever that plan was, it was big enough to leave him behind without a second thought. The words echoed in Miles's head long after Elena finished speaking. She boarded another flight, different destination. The sentence felt unreal, like a line from a movie that didn't belong to his life, yet the weight in his chest told him it was painfully real. Rowan Pike studied his face closely, as if gauging how much more truth he could handle. "She didn't list you as an emergency contact," Rowan added calmly. "In fact, she didn't list anyone connected to you at all." Miles let out a slow breath. "That doesn't make sense," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We planned this together." Rowan tilted her head. "Did you?" The question landed softly, but it cut deep. They moved to a quieter interview room. Away from the medical bay, Miles' nausea had faded, replaced by a hollow ache. He sat across from Rowan, hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Elena stood near the door, arms crossed, watchful. Rowan asked about his marriage. Not the surface details, but the texture of it. When decisions started shifting, when arguments began looping, when Miles first felt like he was always apologizing for things he didn't understand. As he spoke, memories surfaced with unsettling clarity. Serena insisting on managing the insurance policies, Serena encouraging him to sign documents to save time, Serena reminding him, again and again, how forgetful he could be. "I thought it was love," Miles said quietly. "I thought she was taking care of me." Rowan nodded. "That's usually how it starts." Elena stepped forward. "I've seen her before," she said. "Different name, different hair, same eyes." Miles looked up sharply. "Where?" "Another flight," Elena replied. "2 years ago, a couple traveling for a fresh start. The husband got sick mid-air, real sick. By the time we landed, he was unresponsive." Miles' throat tightened. "What happened to him?" "He didn't make it," Elena said. "Natural causes," they said. "But something never sat right with me. And when I saw your wife today, I recognized the pattern." Silence pressed in. Rowan slid a folder across the table. "We ran a quick check. Your wife booked her new ticket under a different last name. Paid cash, one way." Miles stared at the folder without opening it. A strange calm washed over him. Not peace, but clarity. The last thread of denial snapped. "She was going to leave me," he said. Rowan corrected him gently. "She already did." They let him sit with that truth. Outside, the muffled sounds of the airport continued announcements, rolling suitcases, life moving forward as if nothing monumental had just happened. After a while, Rowan spoke again. "We can't hold her without evidence, but we can watch. And if you're willing to help us, you could be that evidence." Miles looked up. "How?" "By doing exactly what she expects," Rowan said, believing her. The idea made his stomach twist. "You want me to pretend everything's fine?" "I want you to pretend you don't know," Rowan replied. "People like her get careless when they think they're in control." Elena met Miles's eyes. "You won't be alone." Miles nodded slowly, though fear curled tight in his chest. He had spent years avoiding conflict, shrinking himself to keep the peace. Now, survival demanded the opposite. They released him a short time later, advising him to stay nearby. As he stepped back into the terminal, his phone buzzed. A message from Serena. "I'm so sorry I had to leave suddenly. Emergency with my sister. Please rest. We'll talk soon." "I love you." The words felt rehearsed, polished, empty. Miles typed back slowly, hands steady despite everything. "Okay, I'm resting. Let me know when you land." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. He slipped the phone into his pocket and leaned against a pillar, watching strangers pass by. Couples, families, people who trusted the ones walking beside them. Elena joined him. "She'll reach out again," she said. "She always does." "Why?" Miles asked. "Because unfinished business makes people nervous," Elena replied. and you're unfinished. That night, Miles checked into a modest airport hotel at Rowan's suggestion. The room was quiet, too quiet. Without Serena's presence, the space felt unfamiliar, as if he'd stepped into someone else's life. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his laptop. For the first time in years, he logged into accounts Serena usually handled: banking, insurance, travel records. What he found made his hands shake. Policies he barely remembered signing. Coverage amounts far higher than he'd realized. Beneficiaries changed quietly. Recently, his phone buzzed again. Serena, I miss you already. This trip means everything to us. Trust me. Trust me. Miles closed his eyes. Trust had nearly cost him his life. He replied with a single word. Always. He hated himself for typing it. He hated that it was necessary. As the night stretched on, Miles lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The man who boarded that plane hours earlier had believed love was about loyalty, about staying even when things felt wrong. Now he understood something else. Love without honesty was just a weapon waiting to be used. And somewhere out there, Serena believed she'd won. Miles clenched his fists, a new resolve hardening in his chest. She had made one mistake. She had let him live. Morning light crept through the thin hotel curtains, pale and unforgiving. Miles hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Serena's voice replayed in his head, soft, reassuring, practiced. Trust me. The words felt poisonous now. He showered, dressed, and forced himself to move like a man who wasn't unraveling. Rowan had been clear. Observe, don't confront. Gather, don't accuse. Miles repeated it like a mantra as he stepped back into the airport, blending into the stream of travelers. Elena met him near a coffee stand, dressed casually now, hair pulled back, no uniform. She used a rental car counter on level 3, she said quietly. Paid cash again. Rowan joined them moments later. We pulled partial CCTV, she added. She wasn't alone. They walked together toward the escalators. Miles's heart hammered as they reached the overlook of the arrivals hall. Down below, Serena stood near a column, posture relaxed, scanning the crowd. Beside her was a man Miles had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He leaned in close when he spoke, too close for a stranger. That's Cal Dempsey, Rowan said under her breath. We've been tracking him for months, fixer. Middleman, fake documents, burner phones, cash moves. Miles' stomach dropped. She knows him. Rowan's expression was grim. Very well, apparently. They watched as Cal handed Serena a slim envelope. She checked its contents quickly, then slipped it into her bag with practiced ease. No hesitation, no surprise. Miles raised his phone, hands shaking, and snapped a photo. Then another. The sound felt deafening. Though no one looked up, Serena laughed at something Cal said, a genuine laugh Miles hadn't heard in months. It cut deeper than he expected. She's leaving the airport, Elena whispered. They followed at a distance, careful not to be obvious. Serena and Cal moved fast, confident, weaving through crowds like people who knew exactly where they were going. At the parking garage, Cal opened the trunk of a sedan. Serena placed her bag inside, then paused. Her head turned. For a heartbeat, Miles thought he was imagining it. Then her eyes locked onto his. Time slowed. The world narrowed to that single moment of recognition. Serena's expression flickered surprise, calculation, then something cold and sharp. She said something to Cal. He turned, scanning the area. Rowan cursed softly. We're burned. Go, Rowan said to Miles. Now. Miles turned and walked, forcing himself not to run. His pulse roared in his ears as he ducked behind a row of parked cars. He didn't look back until he reached the stairwell. Inside, his phone buzzed. Serena, why are you following me? His breath caught. He typed carefully. I was getting fresh air. I thought I saw you. Seconds passed. Serena, you're confused again. We'll talk later. The implication was clear. She was already rewriting reality. Rowan found him near the elevators minutes later. You got photos. Miles nodded, showing her the screen. That's good, Rowan said. Not enough to arrest, but enough to keep pushing. They regrouped in a quiet corner. Rowan explained Cal's pattern, how he facilitated exits, cleaned up loose ends, made people disappear socially and financially before worse things happened. Your wife doesn't panic, Rowan said. That tells me she's done this before. Miles thought of the napkin, the warning, the man Elena had mentioned, who never woke up. A wave of anger surged, hot and unfamiliar. What do I do now? Rowan met his eyes. You play the part she wrote for you, the worried husband, the grateful one. As if summoned by the thought, Miles' phone rang. Serena's name filled the screen. He answered, putting it on speaker. Miles, Serena said, voice trembling just enough. Why didn't you tell me you left the medical room? I was terrified. I didn't want to worry you, he said, hating how natural the lie sounded. A pause. You saw me, didn't you? I thought I did, Miles replied. Maybe I was mistaken. Another pause longer this time. He could almost hear her recalculating. I wish you'd trusted me enough to come talk to me, she said softly. We're supposed to be a team. The words used to melt him. Now they felt like a script. I do trust you, he said. I'm just shaken. That's okay, Serena said. We'll fix it. Meet me tonight. We need to talk privately. Rowan shook her head slowly. A warning. Where? Miles asked. Your hotel, Serena replied. I'll bring something to help you relax. The line went dead. Miles stared at the phone, dread pooling in his gut. Rowan exhaled sharply. She's escalating. Elena's face was pale. You can't be alone with her. Rowan nodded. You won't be. We'll wire the room. Audio, visual. If she slips, even once. Miles thought of Serena's smile, of the envelope, of the way she'd looked at him when she realized he was watching. Okay, he said. His voice was steady, even if his hands weren't. Let's finish this. As they walked out together, Miles understood the truth he'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about catching Serena. It was about surviving her. The hotel room felt different once Rowan's team finished setting it up. Miles couldn't see the cameras, but he knew they were there, hidden in the smoke detector. The corner of the television, the shadow above the door frame. Wires ran beneath the carpet, feeding into a neighboring room where Rowan and two other officers waited. Headphones on, eyes sharp, Miles sat on the edge of the bed, palms flat against his thighs, breathing slowly. Every instinct told him to leave, to run until the city blurred into something unrecognizable. But running was what Serena expected when men finally realized who she was. Tonight, he would stay. Elena lingered by the door. Remember, she said quietly. Don't challenge her directly. Let her talk. Miles nodded. She likes to hear herself explain things. Elena gave a tight smile. Exactly. A knock came, soft but deliberate. Miles's heart lurched. He stood, smoothed his shirt, and opened the door. Serena stepped inside, as if nothing had happened. She wore a dark green coat, hair pulled back, expression warm and relieved. In her hand was a small paper bag. There you are, she said, setting the bag down. I was worried. She reached for him, arms sliding around his shoulders. For a moment, Miles almost forgot. Muscle memory urged him to relax into her, to accept the familiar comfort. Then he remembered the envelope, the burner phone, the way she had left without looking back. He stiffened just slightly. Serena noticed. You're still upset, she murmured, pulling away just enough to search his face. I hate that I had to leave you like that. It's okay, Miles said. I know you didn't have a choice. Her eyes softened at the words. Approval flickered there. She opened the bag and took out a bottle of water and a small vial. This helps me sleep when my nerves are shot, she said lightly. Just a few drops. Herbal. Miles' pulse quickened. He forced himself to nod. Thanks. Serena unscrewed the cap, her movements precise. You've been under so much stress, she said. I keep telling you, your body reacts before your mind does. There it was again. The narrative. The way she framed his fear as weakness. Miles accepted the bottle, his fingers brushing hers. He pretended to drink, tilting it just enough for show, then set it down beside the bed. Serena watched closely, too closely. You didn't swallow, she said. Miles froze for a fraction of a second, then laughed weakly. Sorry, my stomach's still weird. Her gaze lingered, sharp and assessing. Then she smiled again. That's fine. We'll take it slow. She moved around the room, setting her coat aside, glancing briefly at the bathroom door, the window, the nightstand. Miles realized she was checking exits, counting. She sat beside him on the bed. You scared me today, she said softly. When you weren't where they said you were, I needed air, he replied. Everything felt off. Serena placed a hand on his knee. That's because you don't trust yourself anymore, she said gently. You let strangers get into your head. Miles felt a flicker of anger. He kept his voice even. The flight attendant seemed worried. Serena's hand tightened imperceptibly. People project, she said, especially women who think they're saving someone. In the other room, Rowan's jaw clenched. Serena leaned closer. You know me, Miles. I would never hurt you. The lie sat between them, heavy and undeniable. Miles lowered his gaze. I know, she sighed, satisfied, and stood. I'll get you something else, she said, heading toward the bathroom. As soon as she turned away, Miles' phone buzzed one short vibration. Rowan's signal, keep her talking. Serena returned with a towel, dabbing his forehead theatrically. You're warm, she murmured. We should call it an early night. Did you really have to go to your sister? Miles asked suddenly. Serena paused. Just for a beat? Yes, she said. Why? No reason, he replied. I just wish I'd met her more. A shadow crossed Serena's face. Family is complicated, she said. Some things are better handled alone. She reached for his wallet on the nightstand, fingers hovering. What are you doing? Miles asked. Just checking if you still have your ID, she said smoothly. In case we need to go to a clinic. Miles' stomach turned. I'm fine, Serena smiled. Of course you are. Her phone rang then, sudden and sharp. She glanced at the screen and turned away. I need to take this. Miles watched her step toward the window, lowering her voice. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but he caught enough. Yes, tonight. He's calm now. No, I'll handle it. A chill crept up his spine. She hung up and turned back, her expression already reset. Everything okay? Miles asked. Yes, she said. We're on schedule. The words hit him like ice water. What schedule? He asked quietly. Serena stopped. For the first time that night, she didn't smile. The silence stretched. Then she laughed softly. Listen to you, she said. Always overthinking. She reached for the water bottle again, pressing it into his hand. Drink. You'll feel better. Miles looked at the bottle, then at her. No, he said. The word landed between them like a dropped glass. Serena's eyes hardened. Don't be difficult. I don't want it, he repeated. Something dark flashed across her face. She straightened slowly, stepping back, reassessing him as if he were no longer predictable. In the next room, Rowan was already moving. Serena exhaled, a sound stripped of warmth. You really are more trouble than I expected, she said. Miles' heart pounded, but he met her gaze. I know what you're doing. For a moment, he thought she might lunge at him. Instead, she smiled a cold, unfamiliar smile. Then you should have stayed on the plane, she said. The door burst open. The room exploded into motion. Rowan and two officers surged in, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. Serena barely flinched. She lifted her hands slowly, expression smoothing into practiced calm, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. Miles staggered back, legs weak, the adrenaline crashing through him in violent waves. Elena appeared at his side, gripping his arm, steadying him before his knees gave out. It's a misunderstanding, Serena said evenly. My husband is unwell. I was trying to help him. Rowan didn't respond. She stepped forward, cuffing Serena's wrists with swift precision. The click of metal echoed through the room. Serena's eyes flicked to Miles, not angry, not afraid, assessing. You look exhausted, Serena said softly. I warned you about stress. Miles felt something break free inside him. You tried to poison me, he said, his voice shaking but loud enough to fill the space. Serena tilted her head. You're imagining things again. Rowan held up the vial. We'll let the lab decide. For the first time, Serena's composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but it was there. Her jaw tightened. You won't be able to hold me, she said. You don't have enough. Rowan met her stare. Maybe not yet. They escorted Serena out. As she passed Miles, she leaned in just enough for him to hear. You could have been taken care of, she whispered. Now you're just in the way. The door closed behind her. The room felt suddenly empty, like the aftermath of a storm. Miles sank onto the bed, hands trembling. Elena crouched in front of him. You did great, she said gently. I don't feel great, he replied. I feel hollow. That's normal, Rowan said, returning after securing Serena. What you went through, what she did, it doesn't disappear just because she's in cuffs. Miles nodded numbly. They relocated him to another hotel under Rowan's supervision. The night blurred into interviews, statements, evidence logging. The vial tested positive for a sedative legal in small doses. Lethal when combined with alcohol or repeated use. Serena claimed it was for herself. The story unraveled quickly. By dawn, Rowan confirmed what Elena had suspected. Serena wasn't new to this. Multiple aliases, multiple marriages, insurance payouts, men who'd gotten sick at convenient times. Cal Dempsey was still out there. Days passed. Miles stayed inside, curtains drawn, mind racing. Every sound made him flinch. He replayed conversations from years past, seeing them now with brutal clarity. The compliments that isolated him, the concern that controlled him, the love that slowly erased him. Rowan visited often, updating him in careful increments. We're tracking Cal, she said one afternoon. He's nervous. That makes him sloppy. Miles stared out the window. She'll try to reach me again. Rowan nodded. She always does. That evening, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. I never meant for things to get so messy. Miles' chest tightened. He showed Rowan the screen. She motioned for him to reply. Miles typed slowly. I don't understand any of this. The response came almost immediately. Unknown number. You weren't supposed to. That was the point. Miles swallowed. Why me? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, unknown number. Because you were kind. Because you trusted. Because you were worth something. Miles felt sick. Worth something to her. Rowan gestured for him to keep going. Miles, are you safe? A pause. Longer this time. Unknown number. Not anymore. Cal thinks I talked. He's wrong, but he's scared. Rowan's eyes sharpened. She leaned closer. Miles, where are you? Another pause. Then a message that made Rowan inhale sharply. Unknown number. Miami. Near the docks. He's meeting someone tonight. After that, I don't know. Rowan was already moving, barking orders into her phone. Do I tell her to wait? Miles asked. Rowan shook her head. No, let her think she's still pulling strings. Hours later, they were in Miami, the heat pressed down heavy and wet, the air thick with salt and exhaust. Miles stayed in the car, while Rowan and her team positioned themselves near a deserted warehouse by the water. Through binoculars, Rowan spotted Cal. He paced near a black SUV, checking his watch, scanning the shadows. Serena emerged from the warehouse moments later, hands bound loosely, posture defiant. Even like this, she carried herself like someone in control. Cal stepped toward her. Their argument was silent from this distance, but their body language spoke volumes. Cal's agitation, Serena's cold fury. Rowan whispered into her mic. Wait. Cal shoved Serena. She stumbled but didn't fall. That was enough. The team moved fast. Sirens shattered the night. Cal bolted for the SUV. Serena screamed, not fear, but rage. Miles watched from the car as Cal was tackled to the ground. The fight brief and brutal. Serena dropped to her knees. Finally understanding there was no escape left, Rowan approached her, cuffs ready. Serena looked up, eyes blazing. He was nothing, she spat. I could have done it without him. Rowan didn't respond. As Serena was led away, her gaze found Miles in the distance. For a moment, something like regret flickered there, or maybe it was simply the frustration of a plan undone. Miles didn't wave. He didn't look away. He just stood, breathing, alive. Later, as dawn broke over the water, Rowan handed him a cup of coffee. It's over, she said. Miles watched the sun rise, light spilling across the horizon. He felt older, quieter, but beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Freedom, he thought of the whisper on the plain, of the injustice that had almost ended him, of the mystery that had dragged him into the truth. Somewhere inside, a voice finally spoke up, not afraid, not apologizing. You survived. The sun was fully up by the time Miles returned to the hotel, but sleep still refused to come. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, a reminder of how temporary everything felt now. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. They were steady. That surprised him. Rowan had been clear. Before leaving Miami, Serena and Cal were both in custody. Charges were being stacked carefully, methodically: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted homicide. The case would take time, but the trajectory was set. There would be no quiet exits this time. No disappearing into new names and new lives. Still, Miles couldn't shake the feeling that the danger hadn't fully passed. Trauma didn't turn off just because the threat was gone. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A reflexive jolt shot through him before he even looked at the screen. Then he exhaled when he saw Rowan's name. They're being transferred this morning. You're safe. Safe. The word felt unfamiliar. Miles typed back a simple thank you, then set the phone face down. For the first time in days, there was nothing he was supposed to do. No pretending, no watching his words, no calculating her reactions. The silence pressed in, heavy and revealing. He stood and opened the curtains. Outside, planes lifted into the sky, one by one, engines roaring, disappearing into the blue. Just days ago, that sight had filled him with dread. Now it stirred something closer to resolve. He thought about Elena, how she'd put everything on the line for a stranger because she trusted her instincts. How many times had he ignored his own? A knock sounded at the door. Miles tensed, then relaxed when Elena stepped inside, holding 2 coffees. I figured you'd be awake, she said. He accepted the cup, fingers warming around it. I don't think I'll sleep much for a while. That's okay, Elena replied. You don't need to rush healing. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Miles spoke, voice low. I keep replaying everything, wondering how I missed it. Elena shook her head. You didn't miss it. You explained it away. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. She was good, Elena continued. Predators usually are. They don't look like villains. They look like answers. The words settled deep. Later that day, Miles met with a lawyer, arranged by Rowan's department. The meeting was sobering. Accounts frozen, assets under review, the marriage under immediate legal scrutiny. It felt like dismantling a life piece by piece. But it was also a reclaiming. That evening, alone again, Miles opened an old group chat with friends he hadn't spoken to in years. He hovered over the keyboard, unsure. Then he typed a simple message. Hey, I know it's been a long time. I could really use a coffee sometime. Responses came faster than he expected. Warm, unconditional, real. Something in his chest loosened. Days turned into a week. The tension in his body slowly eased. He took walks, ate meals without forcing himself, slept in fragments that gradually grew longer. One afternoon, Rowan called with an update. Serena had tried to bargain, offering names, routes, and details of other scams. She'd shown no remorse, only irritation at being caught. She asked about you, Rowan said. Miles' grip tightened on the phone. What did you say? That you're moving on. After the call, Miles sat for a long time, absorbing the weight of that sentence. Moving on didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing not to live inside the wound. On his last day in the city, Miles returned to the airport, not to fly, but to confront a fear. He stood near the same gate, watching people board, listening to announcements echo through the terminal. Elena found him there. Thought you might be, she said. He smiled faintly. I wanted to prove something to myself. That you're not broken, that I don't have to run. They stood together as another flight departed. Miles felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it didn't consume him. It passed. I don't know what comes next, he admitted. Elena shrugged. You don't need to. Just don't ignore yourself again. He nodded. I won't. As he turned to leave, Miles glanced back at the runway one last time. He thought about how close he'd come to disappearing, not just physically, but as a person. How quietly it could have happened. Instead, he was still here. Scarred, yes, but awake. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something he could choose. The official statements came later, folded into envelopes stamped with seals and signatures that made everything feel final. Miles read them slowly at his kitchen table after returning home. The house too quiet without Serena's carefully curated presence. Each document confirmed what his body already knew. The marriage was suspended, the assets locked, the investigation ongoing. Her name appeared again and again in black ink, stripped of warmth, reduced to a subject in a case file. At night, the house creaked and sighed, like it was learning how to breathe without her. Miles slept on the couch at first, unsure why. The bedroom felt contaminated by memory, the exact angle of the lamp she liked, the drawer where she kept things he never questioned. When sleep came, it arrived in fragments. Dreams blurred into interrogations, into airports without exits, into whispers he couldn't quite hear. He started therapy at Rowan's suggestion. The first session was awkward. Miles sat stiffly, answering questions with the politeness he'd perfected over years of conflict avoidance. The therapist listened without rushing him, without reframing his pain into something manageable. When she asked when he'd first felt afraid of disappointing his wife, the room went very still. I don't know, he said. Then, after a pause, I think I always was. Naming it hurt more than silence ever had. Serena tried to contact him once. A letter arrived through her attorney, carefully worded, devoid of apology. She spoke of misunderstandings, of betrayal by others, of love that had been twisted by circumstance. Miles read it once, then twice. On the third pass, he noticed what wasn't there. No accountability, no recognition of harm. Only loss hers. He didn't reply. The days began to fill in new ways. Miles returned to work part-time, colleagues treating him with a gentleness that made him uncomfortable but grateful. He declined invitations he wasn't ready for, and accepted others on impulse coffee with old friends, a walk through the park at dusk, a community class he'd once dismissed as unnecessary. Each choice felt like reclaiming a small piece of himself. One afternoon, Elena called. Her voice sounded lighter. I wanted to let you know, she said. The other families were notified. Some of the men she targeted. They're finally getting answers. Miles closed his eyes. Relief and grief tangled together. I'm glad, he said quietly. She didn't just hurt you, Elena added. You stopping her mattered. After the call, Miles sat on his porch and watched the neighborhood move around him. Children rode bikes. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life went on, indifferent and beautiful. Weeks later, Rowan invited him to attend a closed hearing, not as a witness, but as an observer. Miles hesitated, then agreed. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Serena sat at the defense table, hair pulled back, expression composed. She didn't look at him until the very end. Their eyes met briefly. There was no rage in her gaze. No remorse either. Just calculation, dulled by exhaustion. Miles looked away first. Walking out of the courthouse, he felt something lift. Not triumph, release. That night, he packed a small bag and booked a flight not for escape, but for curiosity. Somewhere he'd never been. Somewhere that wasn't attached to healing or recovery or proof. Just movement. At the airport, as he waited to board, he felt the old flutter of fear rise in his chest. He acknowledged it, breathed through it, let it pass. The seatbelt clicked. The engines hummed. This time, no whisper came, no warning. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky. Miles pressed his forehead to the window, watching the ground fall away. He wasn't running anymore. He was choosing. And for the first time since the injustice began with a whisper, the silence felt like peace. The city he chose was smaller than Miami, quieter than Seattle. It had a coastline that curved gently instead of stretching forever, and mornings that smelled like salt and bread from corner bakeries. Miles told no one at first. He needed this to be his unobserved, unmeasured, uncorrected. The rental apartment was modest. White walls, a narrow balcony, no shared history. On the first night, he slept with the window open and let unfamiliar sounds replace the old ones. There were no dreams of airports or whispered warnings, just darkness and rest. He fell into a routine that felt almost foreign in its simplicity. Early walks along the water, coffee at the same cafe where the barista remembered his order by the third day, afternoons reading or working remotely, evenings, cooking meals. Serena used to dismiss as too plain. He discovered he liked plain. Plain meant honest. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some days, a scent or a phrase would send his mind spiraling back. A woman laughing on her phone, a hand on his arm, the word trust used casually, without consequence. On those days, his chest tightened, and he reminded himself out loud where he was, what year it was, that he was safe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water copper, his phone rang. "Rowan, I wanted you to hear it from me," she said. She took a plea. Miles closed his eyes. What kind? Full cooperation? Reduced sentence. But long enough, she won't be hurting anyone else for a very long time. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. And Cal, testifying against her, he's done. They talked a little longer about logistics, paperwork, closure that never quite closed. When the call ended, Miles sat on the balcony and watched the sky darken. The finality didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. Right? He thought about the version of himself who would have begged for answers, for apologies, for some explanation that made the pain smaller. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that understanding wasn't owed. Weeks later, Elena visited. She didn't wear a uniform. She brought pastries and stories from the air, ordinary ones, mundane ones. They walked along the pier, talking about nothing and everything. "You look different," she said at one point. "Older," Miles guessed. "Clearer," she replied, "like you're standing in your own space now." He smiled. "I think I finally am." They sat at the edge of the pier, feet dangling above the water. Miles told her about therapy, about learning to recognize the early signals in his body, how fear spoke before words did, how he'd learned that kindness without boundaries wasn't kindness at all. "I used to think being good meant being easy," he said. "Turns out, it just made me convenient." Elena nodded. "That's a lesson people don't talk about enough." When she left, Miles didn't feel abandoned. He felt complete. On his last night in the apartment, he packed slowly. He folded clothes with care, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He left the place cleaner than he'd found it, a quiet thank you to a chapter that had given him space to breathe. At the airport the next morning, he moved through security with ease. No rush, no fear, just presence. As he waited to board, a man across from him argued with his partner in low, tense voices. Miles caught fragments: doubt, control, apology offered too quickly. He felt a familiar ache, tempered now with clarity. He hoped the man would listen to himself sooner than he had. The gate agent called his group. Miles stood, shouldered his bag, and joined the line. When the plane lifted into the sky, he didn't look for signs. He didn't brace for whispers. He simply watched the clouds drift past and let the past remain where it belonged. Behind him, somewhere in the vastness below, a story of betrayal had ended. Ahead of him, something quieter waited. Something built not on fear or illusion, but on choice. And this time, Miles trusted the voice that mattered most. His own. The town he returned to wasn't meant to be permanent. That was what Miles told himself when he unpacked his bags, lining books along shelves that didn't yet feel like his. But days turned into weeks, and the unfamiliar streets began to recognize him. The woman at the bakery nodded before he ordered. The old man who walked his dog at sunrise waved. Belonging, Miles learned, didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, through repetition. He found a small workspace overlooking the water and started writing again. Not reports or emails, but notes, observations, questions he'd never let himself ask. When did I stop speaking up? Why did silence feel safer than truth? He didn't judge the answers. He let them sit. Therapy continued by video call. Some sessions were heavy, dredging up moments he'd minimized for years. Others were lighter, filled with small victories, setting boundaries, saying no without explanation, choosing rest without guilt. His therapist reminded him that healing wasn't erasing the past, it was integrating it without letting it drive. One afternoon, an envelope arrived with a return address he didn't recognize. Inside was a short letter from Rowan. No case numbers, no official language, just a few lines. They sentenced her today. You helped more people than you know. I hope you're living well. Miles folded the letter and placed it in a drawer he reserved for things that mattered. He went for a long walk along the cliffs, the wind sharp and bracing. At the edge, he stopped and watched waves crash against rock, relentless and honest. The ocean didn't negotiate. It didn't explain. It simply was. He realized how much he'd tried to make himself smaller to keep peace, how he'd mistaken endurance for love. That night, he cooked dinner for friends he'd met through the cafe, people who knew nothing about Serena, about courtrooms or whispers on planes. He liked that. He liked being known for who he was now, not what he'd survived. Laughter filled the apartment, warm and unguarded. When someone asked why he'd moved there, he said, I needed a place to start listening to myself, and found that it was enough. Later, alone again, his phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in months. His chest tightened on instinct, then loosened when he read the message. Unknown number. This is Elena. Just landed. Thought of you when the wheels touched down. He smiled and typed back. Hope the skies were kind. They exchanged a few messages, updates, jokes, nothing urgent. When the conversation ended, Miles noticed something that surprised him. No aftershock, no racing thoughts, just a quiet appreciation for connection that didn't demand anything from him. As autumn settled in, Miles signed up for a short flight, nothing dramatic, a weekend trip to a nearby city for a lecture he wanted to attend. At the airport, he moved through security with practiced ease. The sounds, the crowds, the announcements, none of it sent his pulse spiraling. He paused at the gate window and watched planes taxi in and out, each one a promise kept by physics and trust properly placed. On board, he took his seat and stowed his bag. A woman across the aisle laughed softly at her phone. Miles felt a brief echo of the past, then grounded himself, feet on the floor, breath steady. He wasn't trapped by associations anymore. He was present. As the plane lifted, he closed his eyes not to brace, but to feel. The gentle pressure, the motion, the certainty of movement forward. He thought about the moment that had changed everything, a whisper meant to save him, an injustice revealed just in time. He thought about the courage it took to listen, when listening felt dangerous. When he opened his eyes, the clouds stretched endlessly, soft and luminous. Miles rested his head back and let the quiet carry him. Later, at the lecture, he sat among strangers and took notes, engaged and curious. The topic was resilience, not the kind born of grit alone, but the kind rooted in self-respect. The speaker said something that lodged itself in Miles's chest. Safety is not the absence of risk, it's the presence of choice. That night, in a hotel room that felt like any other, Miles stood by the window and looked out over a city lit like a constellation. He didn't feel lonely, he felt open. He sent a message to the friends waiting back home. Landed, talk soon. Then he set the phone down and turned off the light. The story that began with betrayal didn't end with revenge or applause. It ended with something quieter and stronger. A man who trusted himself enough to choose again and again and again without fear. And in that choice, Miles found the life that had been waiting for him all along. Winter arrived gently, without drama, the kind that cooled the air without freezing it, that softened the light instead of stealing it. Miles noticed how different this season felt compared to others. There was no dread attached to it, no sense of something closing in, just a quiet invitation to slow down. He started volunteering on weekends at a local community center, helping with basic computer skills for people older than him who were trying to keep up with a world that moved too fast. At first, he told himself it was about staying busy, but gradually, he understood it was about usefulness without obligation. No one there needed him to be anything other than patient. One afternoon, an older man named Harold stayed behind after class. "You explain things clearly," he said. "You don't make people feel stupid." The compliment caught Miles off guard. He smiled, unsure how to respond. Later, walking home, he realized how rarely he'd heard that before. How often his clarity had been dismissed as uncertainty, his patience mistaken for weakness. The realization didn't make him angry. It made him precise. He became more intentional with his time. He stopped answering messages that drained him. He let invitations pass without apology when he needed rest. Each decision felt small, but together they built something solid inside him, a sense of internal alignment he'd never known. One evening, while organizing old files on his laptop, Miles stumbled across photos from years earlier. Trips, holidays, smiling faces, frozen in moments. He now understood differently. He didn't delete them. He didn't linger either. He archived them, labeling the folders simply. Before, it felt honest. Around the same time, Rowan called with a final update. "The appeals are done," she said. "She's been transferred, maximum security. This is really the end." Miles thanked her, meaning it deeply. When the call ended, he sat quietly, letting the finality settle. He expected to feel something sharp: relief, vindication, grief. Instead, he felt steady. Closure, he realized, wasn't a door slamming shut. It was a hallway, growing quiet after long noise. That night, he dreamed for the first time in months without waking in a sweat. In the dream, he was walking through an airport, not rushing, not lost. Signs were clear. Gates were open. No one called his name urgently. He woke with a strange sensation on his face and realized he'd been smiling. Spring edged closer. The days stretched longer, and Miles began running again, something he'd stopped years ago because Serena said it was hard on his joints. His joints disagreed. His body felt strong, responsive, grateful for movement. He signed up for a local 10K, not to prove anything, but to participate. On the morning of the race, the air buzzed with energy. Strangers chatted, stretched, laughed nervously. Miles stood among them, anonymous and content. When the starting horn sounded, he ran at a pace that felt right, not chasing, not holding back, crossing the finish line, breathless and smiling. He felt a surge of pride that belonged only to him. Afterward, sipping water, he checked his phone. A message from Elena waited. Proud of you, not for running, for choosing your life. Miles typed back. Thank you for helping me save it. She replied with a simple heart. No expectations, no weight. That evening, as he soaked his sore muscles and watched the sky turn amber, Miles thought about trust, how it had once meant surrender, how now it meant discernment. Trusting didn't require blindness. It required presence, listening, the courage to act when something felt wrong. He understood now why the whisper on the plane had changed everything. It hadn't just warned him about Serena. It had reminded him that his inner alarm was worth hearing, that his life was his responsibility. Weeks later, he stood at the community center again, this time helping organize a small event. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Someone spilled coffee. Someone else apologized too much. Miles smiled, stepping in easily. He felt woven into the moment, not hovering at its edges. As the day wound down, he locked up and stepped outside into cool evening air. The streetlights flickered on, one by one. Miles took a deep breath and started walking home, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. There was no soundtrack swelling, no final revelation waiting around the corner, just a man moving forward with clarity and calm. And that, he knew now, was more than enough. The invitation arrived by email on an ordinary Tuesday, sandwiched between grocery receipts and a newsletter he never read. At first, Miles almost deleted it. Then, he noticed the subject line. Community talk, trust, safety, and listening to yourself. He stared at the screen longer than he meant to. The message explained that the community center was hosting a small public discussion after a recent incident in the area. An elderly woman defrauded by someone she trusted. They wanted someone who could speak about warning signs, about intuition, about rebuilding confidence after betrayal. One of the volunteers had mentioned him. Miles closed the laptop and paced the room. A year ago, the idea of speaking publicly about anything personal would have made his throat close, even now. His pulse quickened at the thought. But beneath the nerves was something else. Readiness. He wrote back a single line. I can do it. The night of the talk, the room filled slowly. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. People murmured to one another, carrying coffees, settling in. Miles stood off to the side, hands clasped loosely, grounding himself the way therapy had taught him. Feel your feet. Breathe. You are here by choice. When it was his turn, he didn't start with the plane. He didn't start with Serena. He started with a simple truth. I used to believe that being kind meant never doubting, he said. I was wrong. The room grew quiet. He spoke about small moments, the discomfort he ignored, the questions he swallowed, the way he'd been taught that love meant endurance. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't name villains. He talked about patterns, about how manipulation often wears the mask of care, about how listening to yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you safe. As he spoke, he noticed nods, tight expressions softening. A woman in the front row wiped at her eyes. Afterward, people lingered. A man thanked him quietly. A couple asked thoughtful questions. An older woman squeezed his hand and said, I wish someone had said this to me sooner. Walking home under streetlights, Miles felt something shift again. Not the upheaval of before, but expansion. His story no longer felt like a wound he had to protect. It felt like knowledge he could offer. Later that week, Rowan called. Her voice was lighter than he remembered. I heard about the talk, she said. You're doing good work. I'm just talking, Miles replied. Talking changes things, Rowan said. I've seen it. They spoke briefly about nothing important. When the call ended, Miles realized something surprising. He didn't feel tethered to the case anymore. It was part of his past, but it no longer defined his present. Spring returned in earnest. Flowers pushed through sidewalks. The town buzzed with plans and possibilities. Miles found himself saying yes more often to invitations, to ideas, to moments that felt right. One afternoon, while browsing a local bookstore, He struck up a conversation with a woman reaching for the same title. The exchange was easy, unforced. When she smiled, it didn't feel like a test. When she asked questions, they weren't traps. They talked for half an hour, then exchanged numbers without ceremony. Walking home, Miles noticed his body's response. Calm, curious, no tightening in his chest, no urgency, just interest. He smiled to himself. This is what safe feels like. That night, he dreamed again of the plane, but this time, he wasn't seated. He was walking freely down the aisle, sunlight streaming through the windows. No whispers followed him. No hands reached out to stop him. He woke feeling rested. Weeks passed. The connection with the woman from the bookstore unfolded slowly, respectfully. Miles noticed how he checked in with himself, how he voiced boundaries without fear, how being heard felt normal, not like a rare gift. One evening, as they sat on his balcony watching the sun sink into the water, she asked gently, "You seem like someone who's lived through something." Miles considered the question, then nodded. "I have." "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. "Not all of it," he replied honestly, "but some." She smiled. "Some is good." And it was. On the anniversary of the flight, the date he'd once feared would haunt him, Miles went to the airport alone, not to fly, just to stand there, to witness how far he'd come. He watched people rush and wait and embrace. He listened to announcements echo across the terminal. The sounds no longer tightened his chest. They felt neutral, human. Miles sat near a window and took out his phone. A message from Elena waited. "Thinking of you today. Proud of you," he typed back. "I'm proud too." As he stood to leave, he glanced once more at the runway. A plane lifted into the sky, smooth and steady. Miles turned away, smiling softly. The injustice that had once threatened to erase him had instead revealed something vital. His voice, his instincts, his worth. He hadn't just survived a betrayal. He had learned how to live after it, and this time, the story was his to write. The trial itself was mercifully brief. Miles chose not to attend every session, guided by the quiet confidence that he no longer needed to witness each detail to believe the truth. Still, on the day of sentencing, he sat in the back row, hands folded, posture relaxed. He watched Serena from a distance as the judge read the charges aloud, each count precise and unflinching. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted poisoning. The words stacked like stones. When Serena finally looked toward him, there was no performance left to offer. Her face was bare, tired, irritated, stripped of the charm she once wielded so effortlessly. Miles felt no surge of triumph. What rose instead was a sober understanding. Accountability isn't a spectacle, it's a reckoning. The sentence came down firm and final. Years measured in numbers that would outlast her influence. As the gavel fell, Miles exhaled. Not in relief, exactly, but in acceptance. Consequences had arrived, and they were no longer his to carry. Outside the courthouse, Rowan shook his hand. "You did the hardest part," she said. "You listened when it mattered." Miles nodded. "So did you." Rowan smiled, then stepped back into her world. Miles returned to his. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. He kept speaking at the community center. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a practical voice, one that emphasized agency over fear. He noticed how people leaned in when he talked about intuition as a skill, not a superstition, how they asked better questions afterward. His relationship with the woman from the bookstore grew with the same steady care. They moved at a pace that allowed for honesty. When Miles felt uneasy, he said so. When he needed space, he took it without apology. The first time he voiced a boundary and watched it be respected without debate, something in his chest loosened permanently. One evening, while cooking dinner together, she paused and said, "You know, you don't flinch anymore." Miles blinked. "At what?" "At closeness," she replied gently. "You used to check the exits." He considered that. She was right. The vigilance had softened, replaced by trust that felt mutual and earned. I learned the difference, he said, between being careful and being afraid. He kept therapy, not because he was broken, but because he valued maintenance. He ran along the coast at sunrise, breath sinking with footsteps, body grateful for movement. He laughed more unself-consciously, without scanning the room for consequences. On a quiet afternoon, Elena visited again. They sat at a cafe overlooking the water, planes passing faintly overhead. I'm transferring routes, she said. Different skies. Miles raised his cup. To good landings. They talked about ordinary things. When they parted, it felt complete, not like a goodbye, but like a chapter closing, exactly where it should. As summer edged in, Miles received an email from the community center with a subject line that made him pause. Permanent program approval. The talk had grown into a workshop, the workshop into a series, the series into something sustainable, something that would remain even when he stepped away. He stood on his balcony that night, city lights shimmering, and allowed himself a moment of pride, not for surviving, for building. On the morning of his next flight chosen, anticipated Miles packed lightly. At the airport, he moved with ease, greeting the gate agent, settling into his seat. The seatbelt clicked. The cabin hummed. He felt present, grounded, awake. As the plane taxied, he looked out the window and thought of the man he'd been, the one who mistook silence for peace and endurance for love. He felt compassion for that version of himself. He didn't disown him. He honored him for getting this far. The plane lifted. The city fell away. Miles closed his eyes briefly, not to brace, but to appreciate the quiet certainty of motion. He opened them again, smiling. The story that began with betrayal ended not with revenge, but with restoration. Justice had done its work. Healing had done the rest. What remained was a life shaped by choice, guided by intuition, and lived without apology. Miles leaned back and let the future meet him where he was clear-eyed, steady, and free. The place he finally chose to settle wasn't marked by anything extraordinary. No dramatic skyline, no postcard-famous landmarks, just a quiet neighborhood where mornings arrived gently and evenings knew how to slow down. Miles liked that. After everything he'd lived through, subtlety felt like a luxury. He bought a small house with creaking wooden floors and windows that caught the afternoon sun. The first night there, he slept on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by boxes, listening to the unfamiliar silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt open, like a deep breath he'd been holding for years had finally been released. Unpacking took days. Miles was deliberate with it, deciding what deserved space in this new life. Some objects went straight into donation boxes. Others he kept without ceremony. A few he held longer than necessary: photographs, old notebooks, things attached to a version of himself he no longer inhabited. He didn't rush the process. Letting go, he'd learned, wasn't about force. It was about permission. The community program continued to grow. What began as conversations became practical workshops: how to recognize manipulation, how to rebuild trust without surrendering boundaries, how to listen to discomfort without shame. Miles didn't present himself as an expert. He spoke as someone who had learned the hard way and survived long enough to reflect. People listened. After one session, a young man lingered behind, eyes fixed on the floor. I thought love was supposed to hurt, he said quietly, that if it didn't, it wasn't real. Miles felt a familiar ache, tempered now by steadiness. Love can be challenging, he replied, but fear isn't proof of depth. It's a warning. The man nodded, as if something had finally aligned. At home, Miles' relationship unfolded with patience. They didn't rush milestones. They didn't test loyalty. When conflict arose, it was addressed directly, imperfectly, without games. For the first time, Miles understood how safety didn't dull passion, it sharpened it. He felt more himself in closeness than he ever had in distance. There were still moments. Triggers didn't vanish completely. A certain tone of voice, a phrase spoken too casually. On those days, Miles paused, checked in with himself, and spoke up early instead of swallowing discomfort. Each time he did, the old fear lost a little more ground. One evening, sitting on the back steps as dusk settled, his partner asked, "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Miles considered the question honestly. He thought of the plane, the whisper, the injustice that had nearly erased him. "I wish I hadn't been hurt," he said. "But I don't wish I'd stayed unaware." She nodded, understanding without needing more. Months later, a letter arrived with an unfamiliar handwriting. It was from the daughter of one of Serena's earlier victims. She thanked him not for justice, but for visibility, for helping her family understand what had happened, for making it harder for silence to hide harm. Miles folded the letter carefully and placed it with others like it, proof that something meaningful had grown from something cruel. On the anniversary of the day, everything changed. Miles woke early and drove to the coast. He walked along the water, shoes in hand, letting the cold surf wash over his feet. He didn't mark the day with grief or anger. He marked it with presence. Standing there, he thought about the version of himself who'd boarded that plane, believing loyalty meant endurance, believing doubt meant failure. He felt tenderness for that man. Without him, none of this would exist. Miles breathed in the salty air and turned back toward the path, toward the life waiting behind him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't immune to pain, but it was honest, chosen, his. And that was the quiet victory no one could ever take away. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive as cruelty. It arrives disguised as love, patience, and promises you're told are normal to endure. This story reminds us that the most dangerous lies are the ones that teach us to doubt our own instincts. Miles didn't survive because he became harder or colder. He survived because he finally listened to the quiet voice inside him that said, "Something isn't right." Healing didn't mean erasing the past. It meant reclaiming the right to choose who to trust, when to stay, and when to walk away without guilt. Real love does not require fear. It does not demand silence. It does not punish awareness. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stood out to you the most? Or what lesson you're taking with you? And if you want more deep, cinematic stories about betrayal, healing, and self-worth, don't forget to subscribe and join this community.